Hi, Blogging Heads viewers. My name is Betsy Woodruff. I'm a reporter with the Daily Beast. I'm here with Luke Brinker of Salon, who handles their politics coverage. And Daniel Strauss is out this week because he's on vacation. So we are really excited about having a whole bunch of new people in. And Luke, what is like the 30-second explanation of who you are? What are the essentials? What should people know?
Yeah, so I'm the politics editor at Salon. I write about 2016. I write about domestic policy issues and some foreign policy. So I'm sort of one of Salon's jack of all political trades.
Yeah, awesome. That's good. So the most important news story we need to talk about today is obviously the fact that we have a new presidential frontrunner.
We do. We finally know who Lincoln Chafee's Republican opponent is going to be.
Oh, man. So, did you watch the Trump rollout yesterday?
I did, and I have to say, I am all in. I am ready for Donald.
I watched it for a while, and then I just thought, I can't do this anymore. I have to turn this off. This isn't my beat. I can't watch this. I closed out, and like then the next 10 seconds, he was like, "I'm running for president." It's just like, oh my God, this is insane. What do you guys make of this? Like, how do reporters responsibly cover someone who is obviously not a serious person?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of presents this weird dilemma because we've said for so long that he's not going to get into the race. He says every 4 years, I might run for president. And he goes sort of right up to his decision deadline. And then he announces, okay, actually, I love my life too much. I can't give this all up. I'm not going to run. And so yesterday we have this bizarre spectacle where he goes to Trump Tower and he actually announces, yes, I'm running for president. The weird thing is, though, is that he hasn't filed any FEC paperwork, so he's not actually an official candidate for president, no matter what he's saying right now. And I think that so far, a lot of the coverage has sort of appropriately reflected that. I don't think he's being taken particularly seriously as sort of a policy person. I think more than anything, he adds a lot of entertainment value to the race. And I think that that is sort of the niche that he's going to fill. And I think more than anyone else, Donald Trump himself realizes that. I can't remember who it was. Someone called him one of the greatest political satirists of our time. And you really can't help but sort of enjoy what seems to me a very sort of self-conscious trolling on his part. I think that he's...
Do you think he's self-aware about this? Because his entire internet persona and reality TV persona just seems predicated on him being very serious about himself. That seems like the essential element, is that Donald Trump takes himself seriously when nobody else does. And I don't know what to make of that. I don't know if that's part of this sort of performance art thing. I think there's a very strong case that it is, or if he's actually sincere about this.
Well, there are a couple ways to look at it. One could be that he actually is a little bit delusional and thinks, yeah, I stand a shot of getting up there on a debate stage with Hillary Clinton or whoever in the fall. But I think fundamentally this is someone who knows he's not going to be president, who looks at this race as an opportunity to build his personal brand. If you listened to his speech yesterday, he made mention of all the golf courses he has. He name-checked a lot of the books that he's written. He made sure to announce at one of his properties here in New York. So I think he's very sort of conscious of promoting the Trump brand and putting his name on anything and everything he can. And this is a way to get that name out there. I think I'd honestly be surprised if he is even still in the race by the time we get to the Iowa caucuses, because I don't think he's someone who wants to give the 7th place concession speech in Iowa. I think he's someone who will probably drop out of the race and say, I miss my life too much. I could have won this thing, but our political system is so broken, and I'm going to try to change it from the outside or something crazy like that.
Corn farmers. I don't want to deal with you guys anymore. I could definitely see that. Yeah.
He's going to lose his long-standing interest in corn farmers all of a sudden.
What I find baffling about him is you're totally right about him using this as a chance to promote the Trump brand and promote his properties and his golf courses and invite Obama to his golf course, like all this ridiculous stuff. He's obviously very aware of the importance of brand promotion, but then on Twitter, he's totally insane. I was going through his Twitter yesterday just for fun, just because I'd had a very long weekend and I needed to spend some time going through old Donald Trump tweets. And it was insane. It was just like this constant slew of things that are totally unbelievable. And I guess what I find maybe I'm overthinking this. Maybe I'm like investing too much mental energy in the Donald Trump question. Probably. What I just find confusing is how can somebody simultaneously obviously be good at his job and be a prominent public figure in the United States and be polling above a lot of Republican presidential candidates who are getting taken more seriously, but also be on Twitter and say, hey, I hope everybody has a great September 11th, including the haters and losers, which is something he said on Twitter. Like, I'm just baffled.
And that's one of the milder ones there.
I'm so baffled.
Yeah, I mean, so he does have this very sort of prickly public persona. The last tweet I just saw, someone had retweeted in my feed, was something where he went after Barney Frank. I don't know if you remember when 4 years ago Barney Frank had just had surgery and he showed up on the House floor, wearing a t-shirt and jacket over it. Donald Trump was, attacking him because you could see his nipples through his shirt, and it's just like, all right, this is the latest entrant to the presidential race now.
What did he write about Barney Frank?
That it was just disgraceful that you could see his nipples on the floor of the House. And so here we have him now running for president. And it's a weird thing because he is polling, especially I think he's polling fairly highly in New Hampshire, and in some of the national polls, he's obviously outranking Bobby Jindal, the governor of Louisiana. He's outranking John Kasich, the popular governor of Ohio. But at the same time, if you look at polls of Republican voters nationally, and they're asked, who is the candidate under no circumstances that you would ever support, Donald Trump always tops that list. So he has a sort of small, committed core of supporters that will stick with him through thick and thin. But I don't think that he speaks for a particularly broad swath of the Republican Party or the conservative movement. No. But it is going to present a huge dilemma for the RNC and for all these media organizations that are hosting these debates, because you have a very real possibility that he's going to make it into the top 10 or stay in the top 10, because he's there right now.
Definitely.
Last I checked.
Definitely, yeah.
And that means that you're going to be knocking sitting governors off the stage. You could be knocking the one woman in the race, Carly Fiorina, off the stage.
Can you imagine if the one female Republican presidential candidate couldn't be on the stage because Donald Trump was there?
It's a nightmare.
It's disaster. Yeah.
I hate the word optics. What are the optics of this?
I know. Optics is a synonym for bullshit.
What are the optics of this?
Totally. I mean, Donald Trump became kind of prominent in American politics because he was a birther. Like, his birther tweets are still up, are not deleted.
Is he still a birther? I don't know if did he ever repent on that? That's one bit of Trump news that I haven't kept up.
Oh, man. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't even know that it matters. Like, it's just so insane. I'm looking through some of the old tweets that I was going through yesterday, and my favorite is this one. Amazing how the haters and losers keep tweeting the name fuckface funk clown stick like they are so original and like no one else is doing it.
I retweeted that one. That one was great. And he had some thoughts about Diet Coke, too, I saw.
Really?
He said he's never seen a skinny person drink Diet Coke.
Oh, my goodness.
The diet sodas only make you fatter. So, yeah, he's going to add, if nothing else, he's going to add all kinds of interesting thoughts. I mean, it might actually make some of these debates more interesting if, we just sort of pin Jeb Bush down on where he stands on Diet Coke and how that figures into his paleo diet. I haven't heard Jeb's thoughts on Diet Coke.
I'm interested. I would write that up. I would blurb that. Oh, man. How much of it, so as somebody who manages politics coverage for a left-leaning publication, what is your emotional response to Trump running? Is this great news for you guys? Is this a traffic boom? Obviously it's cartoonish, but how do you approach Trump coverage? How do you cover Trump and not be ridiculous about it.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of those tricky things. I think that our coverage has been pretty mocking, I would say. Jim, who has obviously sat in on some of these blogging head sessions before, um, wrote about Trump in the context of the race, where he's basically like, here's the test that Donald Trump presents for the Republican field. And it's pretty simple. It's if by the time of the first debate you are trailing Donald Trump, you should probably not only quit the race, but you might want to consider dropping out of politics entirely.
I think that's fair. I think it's a very fair point.
I think it's a fair point. Although when you think about some of the people who will be trailing him, it's kind of insane. And so, yeah, we did that. We've also published stuff yesterday that said even if he says he's running, he hasn't taken the proper steps to run.
Right.
So I think that we haven't taken him particularly seriously as a candidate. But I mean, I'm not going to deny that. I mean, yeah, this is sort of, it's free content. People love to sort of hate Donald Trump. And I know that in his speech yesterday, he said that he would be the best jobs president that God ever created. And I think even if he doesn't get to be president, which something tells me he won't, he's already sort of keeping a lot of media jobs.
Maybe.
So I'm not going to complain.
Yeah, totally. It's totally true. And if it gets people interested in the presidential election, and if it makes more people watch the debates, and if people follow policy issues more closely, then I have no complaints.
Yeah, maybe, you can learn about TPP by osmosis or something because Donald Trump is in the race.
Exactly. It's perfect. It's just fantastic all around. Well, speaking of presidential candidates who we need to take seriously, but Jeb Bush's rollout was, what was it, Monday? What did you watch the rollout? Do you have thoughts on it? Sort of how his announcement that he's running for president was received?
I did, yeah. I think that, so Jeb has obviously had a difficult last few weeks between struggling to answer the question of whether he would have gone into Iraq, and then sort of getting eclipsed by some people like Marco Rubio, who at one point was sort of talked about as someone who might step aside for Jeb since he was his mentor back in Florida. So I think what we've seen with Jeb is that he has a lot of money behind him, but he hasn't, like his brother was 15 years ago, consolidated that into a high level of support among Republican primary voters. But I think he did have a good day on Monday when he announced. I think that his rally was pretty well orchestrated. If you set aside some of the mic troubles that they were having beforehand, they managed to figure everything out by the time he stepped onto the stage. But it was a very diverse rally. They were sort of showcasing African-American voters, Latino voters. He spoke some of his speech in Spanish, which I'm sure had Hillary Clinton racing for a Rosetta Stone. So I think he's someone who literally and figuratively speaks a language that we haven't seen a Republican presidential contender speak for some time. Marco Rubio obviously occupies sort of that same lane. And so his test is going to be whether he manages to sort of squash that challenge. But yeah, as far as rollouts go, I think that he accomplished what he needed to. He did not, he hasn't backed down from his support for immigration reform. He's made pretty clear that and, Common Core issues that he's going to stand by no matter how unpopular they are among Republican primary voters. And I think that honestly makes political sense for him, because you have a situation now where there are about 36,000 conservatives running for the nomination. And yet Jeb has not, obviously he hasn't been able to consolidate the conservative vote, but Nate Kahn had a smart piece in the New York Times that showed this week that he also hasn't been able to consolidate the Republican moderate vote. And I think that if he wants to sort of power himself through these early states, especially states like New Hampshire where independents can vote, he's going to need to win over some more moderates. And so, maybe campaigning more proudly on his support for immigration reform is a smart thing to do.
Yeah, totally. It surprised me that he didn't originally plan on talking about immigration in his rollout, because it's such a signature issue for him, and there were so many immigrants involved in the official announcement of his candidacy from Cuba and Colombia. I found it unusual that there was no reference to it in the text of his remarks as prepared. But then, of course, he ended up talking about it because hecklers showed up with shirts saying legal status is not enough. And he had this off-the-cuff moment where he said, that's why our next president needs to do comprehensive immigration reform. And
Right.
I thought that was, for him, perhaps the best moment of his speech, but also the moment that has the most political risk and is most likely to be a problem for him in the Republican primary, because he was obviously so earnest and enthusiastic and excited about comprehensive immigration reform. And that's pretty much the opposite, especially in Iowa, but also, among some voters in South Carolina, pretty much the opposite of where the Republican base as a collective is right now.
Yeah, I think that that's a pretty fair read. When he did respond to those hecklers, he sort of balanced it by saying the next president needs to do immigration reform, but not by executive order. So he was able to sort of get his jab at Obama in there,
Right,
which I
totally.
think, politically is about what he needs to do right now. He can't just look like he's extending the Obama administration's immigration policy. And so I think that's the line he's sort of going to try to walk, is to say that Obama hasn't done immigration reform the right way. I'm going to do it the right way. But the other thing that I think is interesting about immigration and sort of where Jeb relates to the rest of the Republican field is that he's really substantively not that different from a lot of these other contenders. It's a lot more a matter of emphasis, because whether it's Marco Rubio or even Ted Cruz, who's obviously one of the voices of the Tea Party wing, they've all sort of voiced support for this approach where first you're going to secure the border, and then there's going to be a path to at least legal status, if not citizenship, which is Jeb's stance now: legal status, not citizenship. And you've seen people like Rubio and Cruz say, well, actually, we're not even going to talk about that pathway until we've secured the border. Jeb is already talking about how you bring those unauthorized immigrants out of the shadows. But, I think what we're seeing Jeb do now is pretty much what we would see any of these other candidates do in a general election if they were the nominee. Jeb's strategy is just to run the same campaign more or less in the primaries as he would run in the general against Hillary Clinton.
Mm-hmm. And I think what's interesting about his stance on immigration as well is how nuanced it is. Like, he's talking about immigration reform on a whole different level than any of the Republican contenders. Like, basically what we hear from all the other Republicans is secure the border first. And in his book, he argues that you can't secure the border without comprehensive immigration reform, because as long as there are economic drivers for immigrants to come to the United States, it's sort of inevitable that regardless of how many fences you build and how many checkpoints you set up, immigrants will find a way to get in. So you have to do it all at once. And he argues that you have to let more immigrants come to the United States for jobs reasons, for economic reasons, to mitigate those causes, those impetuses for illegal immigration, which I think is a pretty. I don't know that I buy that argument, but I think it's interesting, and it's certainly much more complex and nuanced than other candidates saying secure the border first. It's obviously something he's put a lot of thought into, and I think another thing that's interesting about the way he talks about immigration reform is that in his book he's very straightforward about the fact that he doesn't think it's fair to give citizenship to immigrants who enter the United States illegally. Especially when there are so many people in line trying to get citizenship the legal way. However, he's said publicly, at least a couple times, that he would be okay with a pathway to citizenship, even though it's kind of against his principles, if it was part of a deal that got him everything else that he wanted on comprehensive immigration reform, which it obviously would have to be, because there are so many Democratic members of Congress who no pathway to citizenship would be a non-starter. So he's basically said, if he's president, there will be some sort of pathway to citizenship. And I think it's interesting that he's gamed it out so far ahead, and that he's been so straightforward about where he's at on the immigration issue. It's dramatically different from folks like Ted Cruz and Scott Walker, like not just in content, and not just in terms of what he's arguing, but in terms of like how he talks about it. So that's one of the things I'm excited about covering this cycle is following the way these different candidates talk about this really important policy issue and how they approach it in sort of radically different ways.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be one of the major fault lines. And I think Jeb has obviously probably been one of the most consistent candidates on this issue. I think you've seen people like Scott Walker get tripped up, Rubio obviously as well in a pretty high profile way. But it's really sort of remarkable, just if you look at the last 2 to 3 years, how the zeitgeist has changed and then changed again. Because I think, in 2012, Mitt Romney in the primaries had to say that he was for self-deportation to sort of try to win over some conservative primary voters. Mm-hmm. But then after he lost and performed pretty badly among Hispanics, losing them by more than 40 points to Obama, you had people like Sean Hannity coming out and saying, yeah, we need to do comprehensive immigration reform. And a lot of Republican officials sort of spanning from the so-called establishment to the more movement conservative wing were giving it another look. But then the sort of sputtering of the Senate's immigration effort in 2013 changed the zeitgeist again. And now you're sort of left with Jeb Bush as the most consistent and I would say, yeah, I think it's fair to say he's unapologetic in his support for it, but a lot of these other candidates have sort of been all over the map on it. So it's definitely one of those. It'll be interesting to see, and it'll be interesting to see where this issue is, come the fall, especially if a not Jeb Republican is the nominee.
Definitely. It's totally fascinating to me. I'm endlessly interested in this whole situation. Well, speaking of policy issues and zeitgeists, the next thing I was hoping we could talk about is Hillary Clinton's stance on the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal with a bunch of Asian nations. And I'm really interested in your view on what this means for her politically, how she's handled it now, how it's different from how she's talked about it in the past, the extent to which sort of the progressive movement is invested in keeping this deal from happening. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that this is obviously a pretty big galvanizing issue for progressive voters right now. And I think that's really why Clinton felt compelled to have some of her campaign officials come out over the weekend and sort of take a stance on it. I don't know how much of a stance you could say it was. She's been avoiding for a few weeks now, giving a yes or no on whether she thinks that the TPP in its current form should go through. And she also hasn't been very clear on whether Obama should have fast track authority to force an up or down vote on it. I think if you look at Clinton's record and even what she's saying now, it's pretty clear that she wants to get to yes on it. I think that she's fundamentally someone who favors free trade agreements and wants to see an agreement emerge that she can support. Otherwise, I think she would be, taking the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren line right now and just opposing it no matter what the final product is. But she doesn't want to come out and say that yet because I think, she would really sort of risk more of a left-wing backlash than she wants to deal with at this point. If she were to come out and say, yes, I favor it in its current form, or even just to say what is pretty obvious to everyone, which is that I'm not willing to commit now, but ultimately I want to get to yes. I think that just sort of that opens up a whole new line of attack for people like Bernie Sanders, for people like Martin O'Malley, who are already attacking her for not taking a clear stance on the issue. I think if you take a longer view, no matter what the position she ultimately takes is, she would probably be the kind of president who, like Obama, would push this trade agreement through. I think if you look back to 2008, you had both Obama and Clinton promising that if elected, they would renegotiate NAFTA, which Hillary Clinton obviously supported when her husband signed it, which Obama had himself previously supported. And then Obama obviously got elected, never
even talked
renegotiated
about it.
it.
Has he said NAFTA out loud since he got elected?
I think that the only context in which he has said NAFTA is in the context of this TPP fight, in which he's trying to assure Democrats that this is not NAFTA, that this is something else.
I mean, how egregious is it that you can run on renegotiating NAFTA and then as soon as you're elected, be like, eh.
Yeah, I never said that. And I remember too, another 2008 throwback Thursday with Hillary and trade was when, and this was late, late, late in the game. Like she was still in the race, but she clearly did not have any path to winning the nomination. Um, she had come out against the free trade agreement that the Bush administration was negotiating with Colombia. And it caused a huge controversy in the press because it emerged that Bill Clinton had given a paid speech to a group that was supporting that trade agreement. And so she just sort of came out and was like, well, we've all disagreed with our spouses about one thing or another, and this is just one of the areas where we don't agree. But then she went in as Secretary of State and oversaw the final passage and implementation of that trade agreement. So I think more than anything else, what you're seeing with Clinton and TPP now is that she's trying to sort of meet the Democratic Party more or less where it is. But if she were to win the election, I think we all know where she would ultimately come out on this.
Without a doubt. It's pretty transparent. And the Colombia trade agreement seems incredibly important because she ended up supporting that agreement, sort of shepherding it through the State Department. But beyond that, the State Department gave a pretty prestigious award to the government of Colombia for being a good guy, kind of like their Good Guy Gold Star Award, even though the Colombian government has been brutal to labor organizers. And it's something that has gotten Clinton in trouble even when it was happening with the labor movement in the United States. So the fact that she went from this is a bad deal and my husband and I just don't agree to Colombia is a good guy country and we're down and they're great is such a dramatic change. And I just don't understand if how the labor movement can understand where she's actually at on their issues, given the dramatic shifts.
And it's a weird thing too, because I don't think that the labor movement has fully sorted out how it deals with this question. I think obviously Hillary Clinton is the one Democratic candidate who stands a chance of being the nominee, so they can't very well just alienate her, and it really wouldn't be worth investing their resources in backing a primary challenger, even if Bernie Sanders is doing well in New Hampshire right now. I mean, that's pretty much the extent. I think, yeah, maybe he comes within 10 points in New Hampshire, but he's not going to dethrone her.
It's hard to imagine.
Yeah, it's very hard to imagine. And so, yeah, they're sort of left with all of their eggs in the Clinton basket, but they have to know that this is not someone who probably agrees with them on this issue. And you saw the AFL-CIO come out today and say that fast track is not going to be a litmus test in terms of who we endorse, which obviously makes sense when you consider that Clinton is going to be the nominee. But you've also seen the AFL-CIO go after congressional Democrats very hard if they support TPP. So they're not giving Clinton the same treatment that they're giving a lot of these vulnerable House Democrats in swing districts who are backing Obama on this.
So does that have to be labor's strategy then to say the executive branch is kind of a lost cause? They won't have clout with whoever's president, but they can sort of bring the hammer down on these guys in the House and Senate who, are on the wrong side of their issues. Is that how they stay relevant and stay influential?
Yeah, I think that that's ultimately where they're trying to shape the party. I think that maybe if you had a situation in which there was a contested Democratic primary, a seriously contested one, they would perhaps be putting more resources into the presidential level debate. But A, that's just not the situation we're dealing with now. And B, I think what you have seen is that we saw it last week when the House Democrats spurned Obama on this. Ultimately, a president is constrained by what he or she can get through Congress and what he or she can get their own party to agree to. Because there's only so much leverage that Obama or President Hillary would have with House Republicans. And so it's really sort of a question of what leverage they have with Democrats. And if you have a more populist Democratic caucus in the House and in the Senate, then that's the reality that she's going to have to deal with.
So the last thing I'm curious about, and this is sort of a dumb question, but bear with me, is as politics editor for Salon, how do you think progressive activists, like the progressive activist base, feels about where 2016 is at right now and feels about Hillary Clinton? Like, obviously it's not a monolith. But is progressive dissatisfaction with Hillary Clinton something that's getting sort of trumped up by Beltway media, or is it something real and authentic that we see that you see among progressive activists who aren't sort of, professional progressives?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I think if you look at polls, actually, Hillary Clinton tends to perform as well or better among the most liberal members of the Democratic Party as she does with more moderate or conservative ones in primary polls. And so, yeah, you look at those numbers and you're like, what progressive problem does she have? But if I were to write a piece for Salon making that case, I would be flooded in my inbox and in the comments section with people, saying that, I'm an apologist for Wall Street and why can't I see what's really happening on the ground? So it's sort of this weird thing where you look at the numbers and she doesn't seem to have much of a problem with progressives any more than she has with any other segment of the party. But the sort of people who comment on sites like Salon, who are on Twitter and other platforms, they are pretty fired up about it. And so I think that even if, your average person on the street who describes himself as a liberal is a fan of her, I think some of the most energized and engaged liberals, there is a little bit more division in their ranks on the Hillary Clinton question. And I think there are some who are somewhat ambivalent about her, who say she has, sort of a centrist economic record. She's a little more hawkish on foreign policy than they would like, but we would rather send her a more liberal Congress and sort of make protest votes for Bernie Sanders and shape the Democratic debate that way. And then there are others who really just think that she has to be taken down. Like they wish Elizabeth Warren had jumped in the race. They think that they might stay. I mean, I've seen some people say that they might stay home in November. I think honestly, once Clinton has a Republican opponent, you're going to see a lot of these objections vanish, because I mean that's just the way our politics is now. It's so oppositional, and I've seen a lot of people say, oh, I don't want a Democratic nominee who I'm going to support just because they're not a Republican. But that's how those same people are going to be looking at it next year when she's up against a Jeb or a Scott Walker or a Marco Rubio.
Totally. And that's what conservatives said about Mitt Romney too.
Exactly.
It's the exact same thing. Well, thanks. This was great, Luke. I really appreciate it. And thank you to our Blogging Heads audience for listening. And everyone go to Salon and click lots of stories and click some heads.